It's late. The lights are off. You're 3 episodes deep into a documentary about the worst ways people have died, and you tell yourself you'll stop after this one. You won't. Your chest tightens. Your eyes stay locked on the screen. Somewhere in the back of your mind, a small voice asks why you're doing this to yourself, but the real answer is far stranger than morbid curiosity. Your brain isn't broken. It's running software older than language itself. Think about the last time you slowed down to look at a car accident. You didn't want to see it. You looked anyway. That flinch and stare reflex isn't a personal flaw. It's a survival tool your ancestors couldn't have lived without. Dr. Coltan Scrivener, a researcher who studies morbid curiosity at Aarhus University, has spent years asking why humans are drawn to frightening, gruesome content, even when it makes them uncomfortable. His research found something surprising. People who consume horror and true crime aren't seeking pain. They're rehearsing danger. Watching a story about the worst way someone died lets your brain simulate a threat without any of the risk. You get the lesson. You skip the wound. For most of human history, there was no screen to do this rehearsing for you. There was only the story, told around a fire, passed from one mouth to the next. And some of those stories were written directly into the bodies of the dead. In 1950, two brothers cutting peat in a bog in Denmark uncovered a face so well preserved they thought they'd found a recent murder victim. They called the police. What they'd actually found was over 2,000 years old. The body became known as Tollund Man, and the archaeologist who studied him, P.V. Glob, discovered something chilling. A leather cord was still knotted around his neck. He hadn't drowned by accident. He'd been hanged, then placed carefully into the bog, his eyes gently closed, his expression almost peaceful. Why would someone go to such trouble with a violent death? Glob's research pointed to ritual sacrifice. Bog bodies across northern Europe show signs of hanging, strangulation, and blunt force, often paired with careful burial, fine last meals, and undamaged clothing. These weren't random killings. They were performances, public, symbolic, and meant to be remembered. You see the same pattern 5,000 kilometers away and 1,000 years earlier, frozen into a glacier in the Alps. In 1991, hikers found a body melting out of the ice near the Austrian-Italian border. Researchers named him Ötzi. For years, scientists assumed he'd simply frozen to death, an unlucky traveler caught in a storm. Then, in 2001, a radiologist re-examining his remains found something everyone had missed. An arrowhead lodged deep in his shoulder still there, never removed. Later analysis led by researchers including Eduard Agarter-Wiegel showed the arrow had torn through an artery. Ötzi hadn't wandered into the mountains and frozen. He'd been shot from behind while running, and he bled out alone in the snow. Here's the detail that changes everything. His last meal, still intact in his stomach, was eaten less than 2 hours before he died. Whatever chased him gave him almost no warning at all. Forgotten by history until ice, of all things, refused to let it stay buried. You might expect stories like these to disappear into academic footnotes. They don't. If anything, the worse the death, the longer it survives in memory. That's not a coincidence. That's the entire function. Anthropologists have long argued that oral tradition acts like an ancient warning system. Cautionary stories about gruesome deaths encode real, practical information. Don't cross that river during flood season. Don't trust a stranger who offers food before asking your name. Don't wander from camp after dark. The details that make you wince are the details that make the lesson stick. A story that says, "Be careful," gets forgotten. A story about a body found hanged in a bog, or an arrow through a shoulder, does not. This is where the twist gets uncomfortable. The parts of these stories that disturb you most are not accidents of storytelling. They're the point. Evolution favored brains that remembered vivid threats over brains that remembered vague advice. The version of you that flinched at gore and then remembered exactly what caused it was the version of you more likely to survive long enough to have descendants. You are, quite literally, descended from people who paid close attention to the worst ways to die. So when you find yourself unable to look away from a documentary at midnight, you're not indulging some dark personal glitch. You're doing something your ancestors did around every fire they ever built.